All right. I am Andi Kent. I am from the University of Connecticut, and I currently work in CETL with our group on professional development. And we're here to talk neuroinclusive PoliSci today, which is great fun. Just a quick intro to me. For those of you that can't see me on the screen, I am a boyish white non-binary person with red hair. Today it's in a pretty short buzz cut. I have been at UConn for about a year, just coming up actually on my year anniversary with UConn. Before that, I spent a little over a decade teaching political science full-time at a 4-year regional campus in the West Virginia University system. I was tenured, became a department chair, and then decided that I liked doing the faculty development kind of things that I'd always gotten mini grants to do on my campus, and decided to sort of switch gears and move into faculty development as a whole. So I still get to teach, but I'm not doing political science all the time. Neurodiversity is a topic that's important personally to me because I am neurodivergent. I have anxiety, which means that my brain functions differently than other folks. For me, that mostly means that every day is a lot of work, just getting past the nervous excitement of being able to do stuff all the time. I'm a pretty chill person on the face, but what that means is that I am busy working underneath pretty much all the time. But I am delighted to be here with ISA today to get to come back to my political science roots a little bit and talk with y'all about how to make our spaces more neuroinclusive. From the background survey that we sent out, I do know that folks have some background in this, so my goal is to end at after about 40 minutes. That should leave us 10 in the scheduled time for question and answer, and I plan to be here until the end of the hour. So again, if we have interruptions, I encourage you during the course, type in those. Again, I've got Sarah helping me out here. Type in those questions. If we get crunched for time, I'll let you know that we need to hold them so I can get through all of my stuff. But otherwise, please feel free to do so. Also, please attend to your body and technology as you need. Cameras off, cameras on, wander around, pop in and out. We're busy folks. I totally get it. Again, use the chat, use the Q&A if you would like to there. And yes, we will be sending out the slides to all registered participants. So those will be available to folks here. As we jump in, a couple big things we're going to do. The first is just to shortly clarify some vocabulary on neurodiversity. Again, from the background survey, lots of folks have some familiarity. This is coming from the American perspective, so I'd be very interested as we go through. Those of you from around the world, what is sort of the status of neurodiversity and neurodivergent language, verbiage, how we think about it in your context here. We'll talk about some strengths and challenges facing neurodivergent folks. And then finally, what are some things that we can do, ways that we can look at our context to try to be more neuroinclusive. So that is where we are headed today. And our first stop is this piece on vocabulary for neurodiversity. The spoiler alert for neurodiversity is ultimately that everybody's brain works differently. That is neurodiversity. The world is full of different brains who work differently. All of us are influenced not just by our biology, but by the context in which we grow up and how our brains and our chemistries interpret those. And so the cartoon on the side of the screen here is showing us getting from point A to B. Lots of times we think about that as a straight line, but it can be a circle. It can be one person's got A in the middle and a bunch of points B, one made a sheep out of it. I was just reading Dune the other day. If we're talking about folding space-time, we've got A and B's like squished together, right? So many brains work so differently here, and that's a good thing in the world of neurodiversity. Those different brains, this is what we would call a variety of neurotypes. So different people have different neurotypes. Our brains work differently. The picture on the side here is just giving you a short image of a world encapsulated with different colored bubbles, and all of those different colors represent different brains. All of them are different. All of us work differently here. So we have then a range of neurotypes, different range. And the world then is defined by neurodiversity. One of the big takeaways from this is that biologically speaking, there is no normal brain. There's no normal way of thinking about things. That is something that society puts in place. And so as we start to talk about this range of neurotypes, some people are what we would call neurotypical. They are within the societal ranges of what we would expect people to think, how we expect people to think. Some people are neurodivergent, so they are outside of those expectations. That is the extent of norm. It is based on society, which is something I do not have to tell political scientists. So on the whole here, if we're sort of thinking about these little bubbles of what is neurodiversity, what does it mean to be within the norm and outside the norm, neurotypical is the center image on this chart. All of these brains are blue. Every shade of blue is considered normal in this society. On the outside are all of the different ones. And so on the far right-hand graphic, you see this idea of neurodivergent, those outside of that societal norm. What we're trying to think about as we think about neuroinclusivity then is how can we be more inclusive of this variety of neurotypes? And in many ways break ourselves out of the norm space of neurotypical. And higher education, I think, is particularly pernicious because we have all of these really strong traditions that we really cling to. And those are centered around a particular way of thinking. And so as we think about being more neuroinclusive, what we're trying to say is, are those ways that we do things necessary to the learning process of political science, or are they just the way we've done things and the way we kind of expect things to happen here? Breaking down just a little further here as we talk about what categories of folks fall under the umbrella here of neurodivergent. It is a big umbrella, and it is one that has gotten bigger over time, particularly as we've really embraced the idea behind neurodiversity, the idea of brains functioning differently. And so neurodivergent people can include all kinds of folks with learning disabilities, folks with behavioral conditions, mental health, and neurological conditions. And just breaking down, not an exhaustive list, but what some of these groups might look like then. Some are ones, again, we may more traditionally think about as being neurodivergent, and some maybe not. So learning disabilities, folks with dyslexia, dyscalculia, those types of challenges. Behavioral conditions, folks with autism spectrum disorder, Tourette's syndrome, ADHD. Neurological conditions on the right side are perhaps ones that we think about pretty naturally with regards to neurodiversity. Mental health conditions are sort of the newest category that we have added, that science has added to the concept of neurodiversity. Again, embracing the concept that all of these have very real effects on how our brains function. And so if we're talking about difference in brain type and difference in brain functionality, these must be in here. One thing to recognize with some of these categories is that some of them we are born into, some of them are chromosomal or biological, some of them we can move into over time, or we can move out of over time. I think one of the best examples of that is actually the traumatic brain injury category. Over 80% of traumatic brain injuries are concussions. And for any of us who have worked in higher education where we have athletes, we run into concussions pretty frequently. We know that those can be incredibly debilitating for students, and there is no set time for how long that can last. But it changes, again, the way their brains work, the way they can function during those times, and moving in and out. As I've moved to Connecticut from landlocked West Virginia, sailors, we have many more sailing teams and sailors, and traumatic brain injury and concussion is a huge challenge. So when I'm working down with folks on our Avery Point campus, that's one of the groups that they point to as needing to be more aware of. So our context will sort of determine sometimes who we run into within this group of neurodivergent folks. But ultimately, again, this is a large umbrella of people whose neurotypes function outside of that neurotypical expectation. And just with a good, happy picture here of our cartoon narwhals of various colors here. Neurodivergent umbrella overall, just meaning it is larger, it includes more than it excludes. And it is simply a way of saying different brains work differently. And those that are outside of the neurotypical, the societal expectation, represent this neurodiversity and neurodivergent group. Take a break. I get a drink here. What's resonating so far with folks? Any questions so far? Things that are different across contexts? It's very early still in the presentation. I get it.
So if folks want to raise their hands, we can also, if it's easier, allow you to comment that way. Okay, we have a hand raised. Okay, Raphael.
Yeah, so I had a student who, during a short-term trip abroad, in the middle of the trip came out as having NLD, nonverbal learning disorder. My initial question would be like how that's classified within the typologies. But beyond that, I would like to ask a little bit about, or hear like during the presentation about um, how to help these students when we can't divulge uh, the,
Absolutely.
the situation, especially because most students are not ready to or they haven't been prepared to deal with the necessities of people who are neurodivergent, right? So they don't really get what's going on, so they get upset at the person who's neurodivergent.
Yes, absolutely. We will cover a couple things as we go on there. Nonverbal learning disorders would fall under my categories, of course, are never great because anytime we categorize, they become too boxy. Absolutely under a learning disorder, and may have the mental health condition interline with it, because often we end up with overlapping conditions there. Ultimately, you're right. It doesn't matter what it is, and we can't divulge. So there are some things that we can try to do to make sure that students can divulge to us as early as possible. Certainly facilitating contacts with the official centers on your campuses, and letting students know what those options are as they move up is a part. But as I go through, please highlight a couple places or stop me if you want a little bit more on some of these ways that we can change sort of that tone and that tenor to try to make that understanding better across those places. Thank you.
And Andy, I just want to point out a comment that came in that says, I totally agree with their colleague, and go further saying that even the neurodivergent students sometimes are afraid to express difficulties or accept help.
Yes, absolutely. And we know this from across whatever your facilities are on campus. Ours is the Center for Students with Disabilities at UConn. That are the number of students who are willing to go forward and sort of officially diagnose is orders of magnitude smaller than those who actually have it in the population. And there are incredible equity issues that come with diagnosis as one of our standards anyways. And so part of what we'll talk about today are some of the ways that we can try to facilitate students feeling able to come forward or express these things, or maybe even not needing to, because they know that we have accounted in some ways for the realities that they're bringing into our places. So yes, we are along for the ride. Let's go here. Strengths and challenges facing neurodivergent folks as a whole. Obviously, in the end, if we want people to be successful, we're trying to maximize strengths and limit challenges. And what we find is that neurodivergent folks have a range of strengths and challenges that are necessarily, because we're not neurotypical, outside of the average here. The chart on the side is just a sample, by all means, just one random sample here. But the idea is that the neurotypical person is going to score on that gray line with boxes in the middle across the line. It's typical, it's average on all of the metrics that we're looking at. A neurodivergent person is likely to have what we call a spiky profile, which means that their skill levels are going to vary around what the average is. Again, we're not typical, so it's going to be either upscoring above or below. Neurodiversity fluctuates. Their strengths come above what we would consider the neurotypical, challenges below the neurotypical. And what we want to to try to do then is be thinking very deliberately in our practice about what choices are we making and where might we be unnecessarily burdening someone, where we're always asking them to do something that's in the challenge realm and we just don't have to. There are other ways for them to show us what they know, show us what they're learning. Neurodiversity and recognizing neurodiversity says, let's think about that discussion and those choices that we are making. If you know one neurodivergent person, you know one neurodivergent person. Our strengths and weaknesses are plethora and as diverse as we are here, but some crossover here if you had to sort of plumb the literature for what are some strengths of neurodivergent folks across different diagnoses. Excuse me, here's where some of them fall out. Creativity is a big one. Again, if the neurotypical is the box, neurodivergent folks think outside the box. And this means that in many cases, this is more creative here. Tend to have strong visual abilities, are very interest driven and have hyper focus. This can be a great challenge or a great strength for folks if we are interested in our topics. It can be a huge challenge if we're not, because I do not have the ability often to focus if it's not something that's interesting. And so those challenges can come into play, but it can be a huge strength. Get me in the zone and you can just go. Neurodivergent folks, like many folks outside of societal norms and in minority statuses, often end up being empathetic as well, because they recognize and have had to work across the challenges of communication, have had to work across the challenges of interpersonal relationships in ways that folks who are neurotypical maybe haven't had to think about. Just kind of move through society and we meet all the expectations and it's smooth sailing. So those who have had to be more deliberate often are more empathetic to others who have faced perhaps similar or different challenges. When we talk about challenges for neurodiverse folks, a really easy sort of catch-all place to talk about that is in the realm of executive functioning. Again, different neurodiversity components may affect different areas of executive functioning. So someone with ADHD may have some problems with focus. Someone with trauma responses may have trouble with memory. So different challenges in different places depending on the way the brain is functioning. But ultimately, executive functioning is all about how we get tasks done from start to finish and how we carry what we learned on to the next tasks that we're trying to do. And so that process can be interrupted at various stages or made more difficult at various stages for folks who have who are neurodivergent there. One of the ways that I can kind of contextualize then teaching with regards to these strengths and challenges and this spiky profile is to think about our practice and what we're doing and why we're choosing to do what we do. Most of our practice tends to be pretty narrow. Again, whether this is intentional or whether this is a legacy of the way things have always been done in higher education, we tend to all have this same piece. And what we end up doing then again is discounting strengths and challenges for folks. So conceptually, think about broadening our practice. What are some more things that we can do? What are ways that we can approach what we do differently to make sure that we are giving people the best opportunity to show us what they do really well and to not punish them for some of the things that they do very poorly when they also have these types of strengths. So broadening our practice here, just talking about what are the different ways that we can do this. Some of our changes will be really big. Some of them will be really simple. With regards to executive functioning, I'll just put my pigeon up here real quick. Executive functioning under stress goes kaput. And neurotypical, neurodivergent, we know this. Under stress, our memories go bad. We can't make great decisions. For some neurodivergent folks, this may be exacerbated. As an anxious person, when I have a change and something is major, it's done. Like, I will not remember what's going to happen there. So don't give me verbal instructions. I will not understand them. Write them down too. Good practice. If I'm giving verbal instructions in class, also write them down. especially if this is going to be a change that we're doing for our students where someone is going to have to adjust a routine. Having both verbal and written instructions, way to have backup there. So good for all students, great for your neurodiverse students. The other last challenge that I want to talk about before we get into some of these ways to be deliberate about what we're doing in the classroom is the idea of masking. This is a huge challenge that many neurodivergent folks take, and it takes up a huge amount of mental space. So masking is an attempt to adopt the dominant culture or the correct or the norm of society to fit in. And again, I don't have to explain to political scientists. We know society has all kinds of ways of enforcing conformity on folks, whether it is psychological, whether it's economic, whether it is physical ways of enforcing conformity. And masking then is for neurodivergent folks adopting neurotypical mannerisms, fitting in. And I would very much liken this as a cousin to code switching for racial or ethnic minorities or being in the closet for LGBTQ folks. Again, this hiding or keeping a part of yourself separate from your public persona in an effort to avoid the costs that come with standing out. For neurodivergent folks, this can look a lot of different ways. The graphic on the side here is talking specifically about autism. But ultimately it is this hiding how you think, hiding your weird, as some people will say here, in order to fit in and fit in the box that you need to be in to make it through the day with as few obstacles as possible. Again, there are benefits to that, the fewest obstacles possible, but there are very real costs ultimately to masking and masking consistently. It's work every day to run these scripts, to be thinking about this safety component all the time, to be thinking about fitting in. And so there are some really real consequences. Folks who study both masking and some of these other ways of blending into society talk about the long-term repercussions on people's kind of psyche, that you are hiding such an authentic part of yourself. That who are you? Who am I? As I go out into the world, am I the masked person? Am I who I am in private? How do I reconcile those two different perceptions of myself there? One of our goals then, again, another way to kind of frame and think about neuroinclusivity is to be thinking about how can I create conditions and spaces where it is safe to unmask, where it is not a place where someone has to be thinking about deliberately moving through and being safe in my space, but they can be there and be their authentic selves. So unmasking for folks can look like all kinds of different things. For some folks, it might be taking that step to request accommodations, to say, yeah, I need some help here. It might involve movement. Stimming, moving around during classes. I always bring up one of the revelatory moments for me was when I was 40 years old and went to a conference, and it was in a neurodiversity universal design space. But the speaker said, there's plenty of room at the back of the room. If anybody needs to get up and move around during my presentation, feel free to do so. Mind-blowing, ultimately, for that I could just, I didn't have to twitch in my seat or focus on sitting still for 50 minutes. If I felt like I needed to get up because this was exciting stuff, I could do that. So stimming, being able to exist in certain places, being able to set boundaries, to be able to say, no, I can't do these things now, rather than assuming that everybody has to do this. So unmasking can look like a lot of things, but a real goal for our spaces should be, how can we make our spaces safe enough to do that? And we'll talk about some specific things here that are going to come up. But again, as a lens, as a framework, this might be really helpful to be thinking about what are the ways where I can get someone who is neurodivergent to be safe enough to be authentic in my spaces. And how can we do that? Another quick pause here as we move from challenges. and these are mostly just drink breaks.
We have a hand.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, one moment. Okay. Dion, if I'm pronouncing your name, you should be able to speak now.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Andy. Hi, I'm Dian from Indonesia. So, actually, as I mentioned in the chat box, like I have a lot of questions actually because I am teaching several students with neurodivergence, neurodivergence, and I have. Hello, am I audible? Yes. Okay. And then with different conditions, actually. And well, many of the things that you've mentioned, and I'm very interested about the masking that you mentioned, because I have a student who is trying to mask that they have a condition, so to speak. Well, it was found out by one of our faculty members who have, I think, similar condition to that student. I think when my colleague mentioned it to me, it was kind of like an eye opening, because I didn't suspect, or I didn't know that they have this condition, so to speak. So it was kind of like, well, probably like perhaps my question would be like, how do we respond in that kind of like situation? Because this is something that well, as a facilitator, as their lecturer, as their teacher, so to speak, I'm kind of like trying to. I have a struggle to find out how to help them better in their study if I don't know their condition, or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And probably I will have some more questions to ask later. Thank
you,
Andy.
Please. And we only have 50 minutes or an hour here. My email is up. Please reach out afterwards. I'm more than happy to have longer conversations with folks as we come through here. In those types of contexts, one of the things that I would say is it's best to start big with the class, sort of a class-wide announcement, change in policy, reiteration of acceptance and openness, and then kind of work our way down to more personal. So the hope being that if we can open up at the top level, they will feel comfortable enough to come forward and do that self-identification sort of component. So let's talk about a couple of these places and ways that we can do that. And again, hit me up later. I'm happy to continue these conversations very, very much.
We had
Yeah,
one question come in. Do you have advice on how to help when neurodivergent students go nonverbal, especially when some percentage of their final grade is based on their participation in the classroom? And the person writes, I asked this as a TA that can't control the syllabus, the final grade being something out of my control, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to put up my next slide here because it's all about recognizing some of the places where we cannot make changes and how frustrating that can absolutely be. For nonverbal students, it becomes a matter of what are the alternative means of communication. So are there ways that we can open up chat communication during class where they can participate in that way? Are there different ways where we can do some sorts of, instead of group work, kind of a parallel work where you're doing the same things in the same spaces, hearing the same context, but you don't necessarily have to have the interaction components. So what would be some of those features that you can use? On our campus, one of we use WebEx instead of Zoom. But one of the features that we can use in that is a component called Slido, which is an open polling. And I've had faculty members who say they just keep it open during class as an anonymous place for students to dump questions and comments as a way that wouldn't help with your participation grade component, but it would help with the nonverbal piece about how to make sure that those types of students are still being able to interact there. So that would be my push is what are the other ways can we use technology to give someone who just cannot get the words out in those moments, the ability to still be able to say what they want to say. The other thing that I would put into play with folks who go not, many of our activities are very involved. That's the fun part of political science is doing simulations and doing games and doing all of those kinds of pieces. For many neurodivergent folks, that is an extra level on an extra level on an extra level of stress. And the way that we can help and still do those components is to provide background and allow for sort of the scripting of those activities for those folks ahead of time. So let them know what's going to come, what the expectation is going to be. Give me a chance to write out some of my answers. I have to say, my description of what I look like is written down for the start of my presentation of I am this person. I can see myself in the camera, but in a moment of stress, I will not be able to describe what I look like. So I write it down ahead of time. If you can just give your student the chance to pre-script something out, so it's not quite as intense and surprising and scary at the time, that might be a way to help them make it through those moments or to not get to those moments in the first place. As we talk about sort of making changes and the structure of changes in society, I would point you, if you're interested, to a book by Timothy Delmage called Academic Ableism. Fantastic book on how we structure higher education as a whole and the challenges that come in with that. And the graphic that I have off to the right there is basically my version of his interpretation, which is basically that the way higher education was designed is to be exclusive. It is a credentialing system. I was just down on Yale's campus 30 minutes away the other day. This is a way to ensure that elites stay elites and education stays there. And we had economic reasons, we have race, we have gender, all ways that we've kept people out over the years. But universities are also exclusive because they are incredibly complicated to navigate. There are these matryoshka, the nesting dolls here of bureaucracies, right? We have classes and departments in, again, political sciences. I don't have to explain this to you. But ultimately, universities are tough. And what we hope to do is to either redesign the spaces that we exist in, or hopefully actually be able to reconceive how these look, to adopt accommodations when we need to, and to retrofit and to change the way we're doing practice if we can. So again, Tim Delmage, check him out. Very good book there. But we should acknowledge that there are things that we can't change. Change takes time. There are personal reasons we can't make changes. There are institutional reasons, societal, political reasons why we can't do some of the things that we would want to do. And so fully acknowledging and giving grace here that the changes that we want to push for may not be possible. Small steps are still good steps. The other thing that I would like to sort of square away as we talk about solutions or ways of being more neuroinclusive is to center in our thoughts practice 8.2 from the Universal Design for Learning Guidelines. This just basically says that we assume that every student can learn. This is a strengths-based mindset where when students walk into our spaces, it is part of our job to help them figure out how they are going to be most fulfilled and be most successful, whether that's in our fields or whether that's helping them recognize that might be someplace else because their strengths may lie someplace else. But if learning isn't happening here, ultimately, and you're in this space, this isn't just a learner problem. This is also a design problem, it's an instruction problem, and it's something that we as the deliverers of that instruction can try to address. And so really sort of embracing this in our hearts It doesn't matter if our students aren't as well prepared as they once were. If they're coming to us from different places, everybody can learn. And so as we are going into these solutions, that's what we're going to keep at the front. 3 pieces I'm going to bring up here. 3 strategies for how we can be more neuroinclusive. One is going to be adapting our thinking, strengths-based mindset. We're going to talk double empathy, and then a little bit about universal design here. A strengths-based mindset basically just says that we want to be checking our assumptions about students, and we want to always be sure that we are building them up as best we can, helping them find those strengths in that spiky profile. If they are crashing and burning because we keep hitting those negatives, help them figure out what's on the other side. What is a different way that we can, again, do this? Creating space for authentic expression, recognizing and rewarding when someone expresses boundaries, when someone exists authentically in our space, when someone shares and is vulnerable, being sure to not shut that down, but acknowledge that that is a valuable thing they are bringing. We'll talk about double empathy in a minute, but this will be another component. A couple cases that we could use to talk about strengths-based approaches. And I would maybe focus us today on number 2. So you're doing a group activity, and every time you do a group activity, the same person gets up and leaves. They always come back, but they get up and leave during a group activity. A deficit-based approach may suggest that the student just doesn't care, they don't see the value, they're blowing you off, something there. A strengths-based approach says something else might be going on there. What is something that we could do to help this student? What might be going on in this case? How would you approach this?
And feel free to write any responses or suggestions in the chat.
I can tell you, no one should tell my boss. Yeah, Dion, please go ahead. Your hand flashed. I'm sorry. You're on the spot.
Yeah. So I don't know, perhaps well, what I did in the past is like I will wait if the same thing happens like every week or in every class, I would observe first, and then probably in the second or third meeting I would call them and then like chat with them like personally and ask them question, like trying to prompt what happens, or is there anything that I couldn't do to help them learn or study better or something like that.
Totally fantastic. Yes, have that private conversation. Ask them what might be going on here. And I love the having a thought about what can I do to help you out here. I can tell you this is often me. In many cases, as an anxious person, this is a ton of work for me in a setting where I don't know what's going on or what the answers are. An easy way to scaffold this is to give us the answers ahead of time, or let us know what the icebreaker is going to be ahead of time. Again, so I can write down my answers and make sure I'm ready to go. And this will be a less intimidating type of environment. So,
and one person wrote in the chat that this situation happened to them, and they have what they call an exit ticket, asking what worked well in class and what did not work well for them.
There you go. Yeah, again, and it doesn't have to be specific to the individual student. What is working for everybody? This is great information for us to have. And so, yeah, collecting this type of feedback, what works, what doesn't, what do you need to know more of ahead of time to make you comfortable in this situation? Or how can we do this? Again, might be a way to address. So strengths-based approaches, having that type of mindset. Letting students know from the get-go that you are open to that conversation can be obscenely helpful to helping them be more comfortable and more confident in your class. The cartoon on the left is actually one I'm using all the time now because it's all about teamwork. And I think so much of teaching is getting on the same page with our students in a way that gets us collaboratively working towards our collective goal here. And inclusivity statements can be one place where you can do that. An inclusivity statement is something that you put in your syllabus that says very specifically, I recognize that people learn differently, that my style might not be the best way that works for everybody. If it doesn't, please come talk to me so we can figure out how you can learn best in my class. Something of that sort. It accomplishes a couple of different things. The first is that it has this kind of I tone where it breaks down that barrier between yourself and the student as far as someone who cares and is willing to help them figure out how to be successful. So the I piece can be important there. It can also, though, have a we component where you are stressing to the class as a whole that we as a whole will learn more when we bring all of these different perspectives, ways of thinking into the classroom. So it is valuable for all of us that folks think differently, that they think outside the box, that they may be off the wall and get us a little distracted in class. That's okay. And that's good. And that is something that we should value as a class. So an inclusivity statement is that, exactly that. Lots of places that you can look for resources. There's a bibliography to these slides. But some things that you can think about in your inclusivity statements, having your own tone and making it your own sort of personal context. In this semester, I'm teaching a grad class where we're putting together teaching portfolios. They're doing a lot of collaborative work. And so everything is based on discussion. So my inclusivity statement was about that discussion component. That most of the points in this class are going to be based on discussion in class. If that is not comfortable for you or not something you can do, please, again, talk to me so we can figure out other ways for you to earn those pieces. Opening that door, breaking down that barrier, acknowledging that difference, and then again, creating this collaborative component. We are in it together there. So in addition to how you set your tone, another thing to think about is communication in the classroom, particularly with neurodivergent folks. And one thing I want to bring up with communication is the double empathy problem. Empathy is, of course, how we relate to other people. And the double empathy problem is about communication across neurotypes. And basically what it found is that when we talk about communication between autistic and non-autistic, allistic folks, the burden for communicating almost always falls on the neurodivergent person. In this case, autistic person is expected to be able to figure out how to behave in a neurotypical world. The expectation is not that the neurotypical person figure out how to communicate with the autistic person. And so the empathy in this case often only goes one direction. The conformity is expected from the neurodivergent person to the neurotypical. And this is very much a sign then of this allistic privilege, that the normal or the right way of being is that neurotypical way. What we find with the double empathy problem is that we can prove that autistic folks do not have trouble communicating because autistic folks communicate great with other autistic folks. So when we're talking about communication and struggles in communication across neurotypes, we are really talking about this sort of speaking a different language with a different approach to how we view the world and how we understand things. And the double empathy problem insists that we need to recognize that those of us in a more neurotypical fashion have to be willing to move if we are really going to be equal players in this type of communication. Cartoon on the side, dogs communicate well with dogs, cats communicate well with cats. Dogs and cats struggle to communicate. This is the gist of double empathy. We're talking across languages here. And intersectional identities, overlapping identities can make that challenge harder. So if we're talking about neurodiversity and we're also talking with international students working with language or cultural barriers, we can have sort of these compounding effects there of empathy struggles. For those of you that view learn better visually, here is your double empathy problem in graphics here. Again, both of us are going to struggle in communication across neurotypes, and it's responsible of both parties, or should be the response of both parties to make moves to be more open. This situation came up in class earlier this semester, and I thought it was a great example of potential for the double empathy problem. A student was consistently, every time the instructor said, I'm going to get you into groups, give you guys 5 minutes to discuss your answers, the student would get into the group and then be done in 90 seconds and turn to their phone. Now, this could just be a student that doesn't care. We can acknowledge that could be there. However, there's also another communication challenge that happened here, and I wonder if any of you can see it. In the instructions, the instructor here doesn't tell you you have to use 5 minutes. It tells you they'll give you 5 minutes for this project. As a hyper-competitive person, if I could complete that project in 90 seconds, I would think I had won. I did way better than the 5 minutes you required us to do it. I raced out and won that. It's not anything wrong. I just didn't understand the instruction here. If you want me to participate for 5 minutes, tell me to participate for 5 minutes. There. Discuss your answers for 5 minutes. Here are the questions to talk about if you've already discussed your answers. There you go. So as we communicate across neurotypes, a couple things to consider. Use very clear, very literal language when you're talking here. Do not leave things open for assumption or implication. State your expectations. Sample assignments can be really helpful here because they can let students see very clearly what the expectation is going to be, not just in length, but in tone, in language, and so on. And also, as you're communicating, give people time to process, give people opportunities to communicate in other ways across different areas, and to provide multiple formats or visuals. Again, don't just tell someone instructions, give them written instructions as well, and so on. So be very clear, be very deliberate. Final piece I want to give you are just 2 templates based on sort of a universal design outlook for evaluating your spaces. These are not things that we can do here in any amount of time, but there's something that you could take back to really think about your spaces and your expectations of your assignments going forward. Based on the idea here of universal design and usability, universal design just basically says we should be deliberate about what we're doing. And if we're applying that to the learning context, we should be deliberate about what we're doing in learning. And if we use good design, people don't need to ask for accommodation because it is already built into the structure of what we are doing. And so again, it's really asking this kind of deliberation process. For spaces, I encourage people to look at the idea of a sensory toolkit. Sensory toolkits are designed for individuals, but they can be used for us for institutional evaluation. They basically say in our spaces, what are the things that are requiring people to do extra work that make people uncomfortable in the physical space, or that make it harder for them to exist and be successful and be happy and be healthy. This can be true for our students. This can be true for employees. But it, again, looks at the environment. So it says, look at your noise and sound management. Are there a lot of extraneous noises? Are there ways that we can control this? Many students today are starting to use their earbud headphones for sound filtration because they can actually be used as earplugs. So they can actually pay better attention to you with their earplugs in. Looks weird, but it's true here. So what are those different ways that that can work? Light visual solutions. One of my examples on the strength space was students wearing sunglasses in class all day. Between migraines, between fluorescent lights, between distractions with lights, many students will focus better if they can dim that light sensory piece. One less thing to be coming at them a million miles an hour. Smells, visual clutter. Again, this body awareness, allowing students and giving them permission to move about during class may be a big deal for them. So sensory toolkit, what are our senses doing in our spaces, and how can we sort of deliberately go through and be thinking about what are the challenges that our spaces are creating for our students? We can also do a similar thing with our assignments. So one of my UConn colleagues, Erin Scanlon, teaches physics at our Avery Point campus, and she and one of her colleagues came up with this idea of ability dimensions, which again can be just a really great reflective practice for you as you're thinking about your assignments. So if I'm doing a simulation in class, there is a health component. You have to be able to be in class. You have to be able to sit there long enough. There's a cognitive component about knowing the information. Maybe a visual, the hearing component may be very high here. Emotional behavior. What are the challenges that I'm asking my students? Again, doesn't mean that I can't do challenging things, but asks you, am I preparing students for this? Who might I be really challenging with this choice of activity? And what are the ways that I could make that easier or more accessible to folks who may find that challenge to be prohibitive, that may find that challenge to be so big that they leave the room rather than trying to figure out how to participate there. So sensory profiles and sensory toolkits are really great for our spaces, and these ability profiles for our tasks and our projects can really help us just take that deliberative component here of learning and making our spaces more neuroinclusive. Sarah, a couple questions came in. Which ones what do I need to be addressing here?
All right. First question. Considering the current political climate, many queer neurodivergent students may not be comfortable opening up related to many issues and to debate in class because of doxing or the sense of being judged. How do we encourage mutual trust among students who are on the diverse political spectrum?
This is an amazing question that goes so far beyond the neurodiversity piece. But the ground, my approach to this would be, we have to start with scaffolding, and you have to start these types of projects very early in class, not the jumping in and debating part, but the building trust components. So if this is something that you are wanting to do as your course goes forward, have those discussions very early about identity, about place, about how our perspectives differ across different political spectrums, because we need to create then that component in that space. There are some topics nowadays that I would not bring up because I would not want to traumatize my students. And these may be some of those issues that unfortunately we just say, look, this is not a space that some of us will feel comfortable in. And we need to find an alternative medium or way of addressing this. And again, I would be hesitant to put my LGBTQ and neurodivergent students in a space where they might feel like they're on the spot. So do be aware of that.
Another question came in. As a facilitator or lecturer, I want to make my classroom more inclusive for students with ASD, but I find it difficult when other students don't yet understand neurodivergence, especially in group tasks or group discussion. I observe that the neurodivergent folks are often left out during group discussion. Could you share some practical ways to handle the situation?
Yeah, absolutely. So, couple ways to make this happen. First off can be something as simple as sort of the think, pair, share model, where you're giving students a chance to write out their answers ahead of time and then expose their answers to bigger and bigger groups. So individuals think, then they pair up and share their answer, and then they share more broadly here. This sort of escalation can give a neurodivergent student or someone who was sort of certain of their answer a place to test it out as it goes, and may build their confidence there. There are some formal ways of doing group work where you can assign roles. There's a model called POGL. From the sciences, it's simply one option. But the idea in these is that you assign roles in your group work so that each person has to have a particular task. And so they can be things like recorder or presenter or so on. And so the group is sort of forced in that sense to share those tasks around. So by assigning those roles, again, you're not calling out any particular group or person, but you're giving them a responsibility that the group will then have to acknowledge. So two different options there, I guess they could work.
All right, and I'm writing POGL. Interesting. I think we have time for one more question, and I would encourage folks that still have questions to get in touch with Andi. The question that came in is If we
Mm.
assume that every brain is unique, how do we define what makes a brain neurotypical? I want to make my classroom as inclusive as possible, but I sometimes struggle with balancing teaching methods that support both neurotypical and neurodivergent students. Additionally, as an instructor with my own ways of thinking and processing, how can I best account for how my own brain works and my concentration when trying to be inclusive?
Amazing levels of questions here. To sort of circle back at the end here, Sarah, read one more time for me. I'm sorry. I
Okay.
definitely lost that one.
So it's a very interesting question.
Mhm.
How do we define what makes a brain neurotypical,
There
and
we go.
how can we support both neurotypical and neurodiverse students at the same time in the classroom?
Yeah, so neurotypical really is set by society as a whole. So in higher education, neurotypical education typically looks like lecture-based learning, multiple choice or essay tests, midterm, final, those types of, that is the neurotypical sort of approach to teaching and learning there. What we would push for being more neuroinclusive is ultimately that by adding option, by adding choice, we are making things easier for our neurotypical students and our neurodivergent students. Because just because a neurotypical student might do well on tests does not mean that that's the way they'll best work or best function. There might be something else that they are actually stronger at. So by adapting to a more sort of holistic or neuroinclusive approach, we're actually helping our neurotypical students too. I think having things like inclusivity statements are a great way to broach the topic of neurodiversity with your students. So back to sort of the previous question about dividing group work and students not having that kind of perception, we can start opening that conversation with them by, again, having that sort of approach. I love the personal bias concern. What does neurodiversity, neuroinclusion mean in that sort of sense? And there I would just say, be aware of what our teaching styles are, our approaches are, and recognizing that that might not be where everybody else is. And again, an inclusivity statement just says, come talk to me. If my way of doing things doesn't work, let's have that conversation. I think one other conversation to have with students is, when are the places where you need them to behave in a certain way because it's the way the field works? So I'm not asking you to do this because it's the neurotypical way behave. I'm asking you to write in this particular way because it's how you're going to get a journal article accepted. That conversation can be a real one to have with the students as well, about why you're expecting particular behavior or a narrower choice of options when you need to do that. And that's within your objectives.
And all these questions are a great place to start, right? Just to start thinking about how we teach differently.
Yep. Fantastic. Yep.
Um,
I am all sorts of out of time. You will get the slides here. I just want to put up my contact info.
Thank you so much, Andi. This was fantastic. And thank you to everybody for all of your fantastic and really thought-provoking questions. We do have a session running this Friday that's on structured dialogue in the classroom, and we've just added that link into the chat in case anybody is interested in attending. Andi, we did get a question on the slides, if you're okay with sharing them.
Yep.
We will send them around to everyone who attended today.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Andi. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, folks.